Good evening to Fitchburg and viewers of Fitchburg Cable Access TV. Welcome to Your Right to Know, presented by the Fitchburg Republican City Committee, or as we like to call ourselves, the FRCC. My name is Mary Lotz and I will be your host. Tonight on Your Right to Know, we will have a panel discussion with some of my friends from the Fitchburg Republican City Committee. To my far right is Stephen Hartka, our chairman of the Fitchburg Republicans. To my right is John Strang. John is also our special guest tonight, and he's from the Fitchburg Republican City Committee. We will focus tonight on the term Republican and explore the values and meanings behind the term Republican and the Republican Party. After last November's election, we heard so many terms used and thrown around when referring to the Republicans and the party itself. We heard about libertarian Republicans, conservative Republicans, neocons. Hey, aren't they all Republicans? So what gives? What's the difference? And this is what we're going to talk about tonight. To help us work through some of these factions in the Republican Party, we brought one of our own members, John Strang, to help us explore this topic. Dr. John Strang is a retired professor of philosophy, having received his PhD from Boston University. John has extensive study and great knowledge in the area and will advance our understanding of the terms and the political party system. So thank you, John, for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
We're really very pleased to have you. And so I'm actually going to throw out a little bit of what we talked about last month. And I know you saw our show on TV. But what I really want to know is last month we talked about a little bit about exactly the goals and the values of the Republican Party. And some of the core values we talked about, and I'm going to reiterate this. We said the Republican Party or typical Republican voters hold these core values: fiscal efficiency and responsibility. They hold steadfast to the U.S. Constitution, support for the free market capitalism, smaller, more effective and efficient government, lower taxation, personal responsibility, right to self-determination, and equality under the law for all. So I'd like you to kind of think about that list, and do you agree with the list?
Sure.
Do you have any additions, clarifications, things you'd like to throw out when you think of our list?
The only thing I'd say is that I think among those items you listed, certainly Republicans would subscribe to all of them. Mm-hmm. But I think the core value among all of them is support for the Constitution.
Okay.
I think it's the key to understanding where Republicans come from. Now, if people ask themselves, who are Republicans? Mm-hmm. What does it mean to be a Republican? Obviously, the word comes from the word republic. So first off, Republicans are believers in the republic. It's worth remembering that when the Founding Fathers established the Constitution in 1787, they didn't designate this new form of government a democracy. Actually, the word democracy at the time was something of a dirty word. It was only after the French Revolution that it came into more current parlance. But they called it a republic or a union of republics. And as we know from the Federalist Papers, the Founding Fathers, Alexander Hamilton and Madison in particular, pointed to examples of other republics in the world at the time. And if you ask, well, were they seeking to emulate the Venetian Republic or the Dutch Republic? The answer is no. They established a republic by our Constitution. So the Constitution specifies the sense in which we are a republic and we are Republicans. Mm-hmm. So the Constitution is what really defines us. If you ask yourself, what is it that makes Americans American? It would be the Constitution. It's the unifying document. The philosopher Hegel used to speak about what he called world historical events or ideas. He meant ideas or events that were so significant, structurally significant for world history, that they were incomparable to other events. It transcended them. Well, The Constitution of the United States is like that. It's a world historical document. It defines what it means to be an American. And absent this document, or absent the efficacy of this document, we would be like a ship without a rudder at sea. Now, I would say that once one recognizes the significance of the Constitution as defining our republic, from that flow other key elements and core values. The notion of limited government. That wasn't just something that was accidentally picked up. It follows logically from the elements written into the Constitution, the structure of the Constitution. The notion of personal responsibility, that each citizen is responsible for himself. The notion of limited taxation, that government should not presume to take too much money from the citizens. These are all among the list of values, and you named others there. The one that I went into, well, free market capitalism would also be another one. The actual expression does not occur in the Constitution, but the writers of the Constitution, of course, lived at the same time as Adam Smith. They were well aware of The Wealth of Nations, that seminal work that really is the foundation for capitalism. And everything in the Constitution presupposes the freedom of ordinary citizens to pursue their interests, including their material, their economic interests, without the permission or the interference of the government. So it's a radical departure from standards that were applicable in the world at the time.
Wouldn't you say that's actually right down to the community, where you
Yep.
know, all government really starts in the community and works its way upwards instead of from the top down, as
Exactly.
most people think it
Sure.
is. It
Yep.
should be these
Right.
days.
Well,
Yeah.
and then part of that is the whole concept of the Federalist, where you have the states' rights,
Right.
that your focal government in Washington, will say,
Right.
does not have the all
Right.
power.
I think
and
it's in a fundamental sense, you can see where the founding fathers were coming from and where Republicans today are coming from in terms of asking the question, well, how did we win our independence? You know, it wasn't as if some power external to us won our independence for us. It was ordinary Americans at the time, you know, who were the Minutemen, who fought in the battles. And out of that evolved a quasi-professional army. But ordinary Americans were the ones who took the initiative.
Sure.
And they also took the initiative in running their own, like you said, their local communities.
Right from the town hall meeting.
From the town hall meetings,
Right.
right. So it's all a sort of logical, sequential arrangement. But the notion, for example, if to elaborate a little bit more on things like limited government, we know that the Constitution prescribes 3 branches of government. The intention is not to have any one branch have overweening power. On the contrary, the notion was precisely a balance of power, something that we looked into, our founding fathers looked into. Montesquieu, the philosopher Montesquieu, gave some enlightenment on that. But the idea was that no single branch of government should exercise exclusive power. This is particularly poignant now with what we see coming out of Washington, with the overweening power coming from Washington.
Absolutely.
So government's power was intentionally circumscribed and strictly limited. And as we know, what powers were not given to the government were reserved for the people or the states.
Let me just ask this
Yep.
question then, and I know we are a Republican show because we are the Republican Party, so let me just throw this out. If we now want to say that the Republicans take their guidance or authority from the Constitution, that is our living document,
Right?
where do the Democrats get theirs from?
That's a good question, and a very pertinent one now. Increasingly, you know, if you asked that question, say, 50 years ago or 60 years ago, we would have had to say, well, Democrats believe in the Constitution too, but increasingly we see that Democrats are exhibiting questionable attitude toward the Constitution, and in some cases contempt. The present administration is an illustration of this, but also the behavior of Democrats in Congress. This is probably a topic for a future show.
Oh, and
But-
we will have you back, John. This is only the first. Stephen, do you have a question for John that you'd like to pose?
Well, we were talking a little bit about, you know, the different factions within the Republican Party. You know, Mary mentioned a couple of them. You know, there's many many different adjectives, I guess you would use to describe someone in the Republican Party. I mean, personally, I describe myself as a conservative. But, you know, there's also this big movement called the Libertarian movement, and then we also have, you know, the rise of the Tea Party is coming out as well. In addition to that, you also have, you know, what's called the Federalists, which you believe in states' powers, of course. Where do you see one differentiating from the other? In particular, I mean, my concern is, you know, I find it hard to, you know, kind of draw the line between what each party really
Yeah.
really follows. What's
Right.
their ideal? What
What
is
do they
the
mean?
agenda that they're following?
Yeah.
So what's your impression of in particular, conservative, libertarian, Tea Party?
Right. Well, I absolutely agree with you when you assess the underlying Republican ideology as conservative. I think that certainly is true. It's true now to a much greater degree than probably it has been in our history. The sense in which the American Republican Party as a conservative party, however, differs from that of European conservative parties. You know, and this has been true since our beginnings. If you were to ask somebody or interview someone in the 18th century, a European conservative, they would have been in favor of things like an established church, a state church, a landed aristocracy, a notion of a state authority being quite evident and present in your lives, like a standing army. All of those things were rejected by the Americans in the writing of the Constitution.
Sure.
You know, we have no state church. You're free to worship as you wish or not.
However, we do have God in our Constitution.
That's
and
true, but
in our
there's no
documents.
specific church. When it comes to the aristocracy, that was ruled out by Article 1, Section 9, and we didn't even have a professional army for several decades, and then it was only a very limited one. Now, after that, it's true, in more recent times, we've had a split. This is probably the major split, if you maybe split is the wrong word, division within the Republican Party between social conservatives and libertarians, or libertarian conservatives. And libertarian conservatives, as the word suggests, they take their name from the word liberty, and they tend to emphasize the preeminence of individual liberty above other values. That's something, if we have time, I could speak a little bit more about. With respect to social conservatives, they take their foundations, generally speaking, from a religious basis. They believe that the Constitution was written, the American Revolution was won by a religious people. And they hold that there are certain values that derive from religion. For example, they believe that what we call family values in general have a religious basis. The notion that life is sacred, and therefore social conservatives tend to be anti-abortion, except in extreme circumstances. They also tend to be in favor of the institution of marriage as a linkage between a man and a woman, a one man and one woman. They are in favor of prayer in schools, and they're opposed to the efforts of secularists to diminish the role of religion symbolically and really in our public life. Those are some of their beliefs. Now, with respect to some of the other senses in which we can speak of conservatives, in recent times there's emerged what is called a distinction between neo and paleo conservatives. This, I think, is a kind of minor distinction, and it may be just a historical blip. Neoconservatives came on the scene from about the 1980s. They were essentially an intellectual product by a group of ex-liberals in New York and elsewhere who wrote magazines and declared their liberation from liberalism. They tended to be interested mainly in foreign policy, and they tended to be in favor of intervention in foreign policy to promote the American ideal abroad. They were strengthened during the George W. Bush administration, where there were a number of neoconservatives in significant appointments. It's claimed that we got into Iraq because of neoconservatives. The word paleoconservative just means old conservatives. It's something like the word, well, you're a guitarist, you know, guitars are now called acoustic guitars unless you play electric guitars, but previously they were just called guitars. Well, previously, paleoconservatives were just called conservatives.
Okay.
They tend to be more old line.
So the term came around really because of the new neoconservative
Exactly.
term,
It's not that we're
neocon.
old, it's just that we're old.
That's right, that's right. And let's see, the Tea Party, I guess, the Tea Party is a very interesting movement. It's quite distinct from any of the political parties because it is explicitly not political. It does not have the intention of becoming a political
Really?
party.
Why do so many people think that it's?
I don't know, it's a
purely
misunderstanding.
Yeah.
If you actually listen to the leaders of the various Tea Parties, and they have to be in the plural because there's like the Tea Party Express and the Tea Party Patriots, various designations, there's not one unifying Tea Party, but their interest is not in making themselves a political party, but in offering a forum, a venue for people who are thinking the correct way, in their opinion, to present themselves. They support candidates. And later on, we may actually have a chance to indicate where some of that support has expressed itself.
So would you consider them to be constitutionalist?
Oh, yes, absolutely. In fact, that would be the first word that would spring to mind in describing where they're coming from.
They're probably the paleo-conservatives, too.
Well, in that sense, yes.
Not the neoconservatives.
Right. They, I don't know. Certainly they're a constitutionalist. They think that government has gone too far. It's
Yes.
become too powerful in our lives.
Yeah.
And they want to rein that in. And it's striking that they chose the designation Tea Party because, thinking back in history where the word came from, it was again an initiative on the part of ordinary Americans before we were free of British rule to declare their dissatisfaction with policies of the British government.
Right. The true grassroots.
Yes, exactly.
Now that you've kind of gone through some of these, again, in November's election, we kept hearing, certain people, we kept hearing candidates' names attributed. This one is a libertarian, and this one is a conservative, and this one is a neocon, or even supported by the Tea Party. Can you, to help us better understand the subdivisions within the Republican Party, maybe give us some idea of some candidates and names, and maybe legislation or something that they've done to give us an example?
Sure. Actually, before I do that, if we have time, I omitted one segment of the Republican Party, and that is the Federalists.
Oh, okay. Please.
Briefly, Federalists, of course, that's an old expression going back to the early part of the country. But in more recent times, usually the best way to understand what a Federalist is to think of the Federalist Society, a society of lawyers and law students that was formed, I think, in the 1960s. Now, Ed Meese, for example, was one of the early founders of the Federalist Society. So was Robert Bork, who was, of course, unfortunately didn't make it to the Supreme Court. We have on the Federalists believe, again, as one would expect from interpreters of the Constitution, because they are mostly lawyers, they are focused on the Constitution. They think that it is consistent with their position to maintain that government should not exceed strictly what is written in the Constitution. They seek to preserve freedom as it is endowed by the Constitution, and are always eager to maintain the separation of powers. By the way, we have
the balance of powers.
the balance of powers, right. And all 4 conservative justices on the Supreme Court are members of the Federalist Society. So even though it's a small organization, it has a powerful intellectual force behind it. But to get back to your question, you asked about examples of other...
Just give me some names. That
Right.
would be great.
Sure. Well, Tea Party representatives, of course, Michelle Bachmann would be obviously an
Okay.
example. There are 66 members of the Tea Party caucus in the government, in the Senate and House. They include some members, there are actually more than that, more Tea Party people than that, but they don't all belong to it because they feel that there would be a threat if they went formally in their organization. But Ted Cruz is an example, Marco Rubio of Florida, Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. These are all Tea Party members. They're all in the Republican Party. And this is sort of striking because even though Tea Party members individually are reluctant to identify themselves as Republicans, when it comes to supporting candidates across the board, it's Republicans they have supported.
I suppose it's a conservative agenda. pretty
Right,
much.
yes. Yes.
We're going to have to cut it short right now, but we will definitely bring this conversation up because I want to know those other names
Okay.
and our and what particular strength of area of the party that they would represent. But I want to thank you, Stephen and John, because this was actually very enlightening, and I think putting some definitions to the names to the words that we've heard is just really what we need to do, because the pundits have led us astray in many ways. One of the things that we like to do now is we like to have our one last thing, or as we like to call it on this show, our final thoughts from the right side. And so what I'd like to do is, as we get set for this, is I'll start with my final thoughts. Does anybody remember the old comic strip, The Incredible Hulk? Does anybody remember that? The Incredible Hulk was the sort of mild-mannered scientist who would morph before our eyes into a green monster. Well, guess what? We have our own transformational man, and he lives at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Right before our eyes, we are watching Barack Obama, the once described larger-than-life president with the intellect that was far exceeded Albert Einstein, morph into Sergeant Schultz of Hogan's Heroes. He's pedaling hard and fast to keep ahead of the scandals which are lapping at his heels with the refrains, "I know nothing, I saw nothing, I heard nothing." On Benghazi, he actually got behind, more likely created a trumped-up story about a video to take the eyes of the press and the people off the incompetence. On the IRS targeting of the conservative, patriotic, religious groups, what did we hear from him? "I had no idea this was happening. I read it like you did in the morning press." And now we find out that we have the Justice Department looking into the records of and tapping records of our reporters and some people from the news media, invading their privacy. And you know what I can see? Next we're going to hear, "Honey, honey, I heard it through the grapevine." Like Hulk Hogan, like the Hulk right before our eyes, Obama is morphing from a leader who leads from behind to a comic strip character. But you know what? It's not funny. It's criminal and corrupt. Steve, your chance.
Would you like me to comment on that? Well, I think that a president that doesn't have his pulse on what's going on under his own administration is kind of scary. That he truly doesn't know, I don't believe that for a second. That the Patriot Act that was passed in the previous administration, just that thing is just it's a monster. It allows the government to do whatever they darn well please, and it's pretty scary. I mean, as a conservative Republican citizen of this country that is pretty concerned about the direction we're headed in, I don't see that anything that's going on in this current administration is really in a positive direction. I watch what's going on with a degree of apathy that I've never felt towards government before. Not that I was, that I am or was, terribly involved in what I can do to change that. I mean, I'm trying to have an impact now by being positive and by being a leader in my community, I think, by helping other people to understand. It's exactly what we're doing tonight. I hope that our viewers got a more clear understanding of some of the terms and what's going on and where Republicans come from.
John?
Right. Actually, when you asked me to give a minute in my thoughts, it so happened my thoughts were in link with yours here and yours too. I was going to cite an example of this invasiveness on the part of the IRS.
Sure.
You might have heard recently of the Catherine Engelbrecht in Texas. She and her husband had a machine shop, and she, in 2009, she decided to do something about what she perceived as errors in the voting system in her local community, in which she caught many cases of voter fraud, and formed two organizations, one a discussion group, and another one an actual organization to pursue presumed instances of voter fraud. This was in 2010, and she promptly found herself investigated by the IRS. They sent her a questionnaire after she applied for tax-exempt status, and followed up after she filled that out in detail with a second questionnaire, and then a third questionnaire with hundreds of questions, including on topics that had nothing to do with her issues. She was visited by OSHA, she was visited by the ATF, no less. A total of 17 times these organizations visited her. And this is an illustration of the invasiveness of the government of the present administration.
Thank you very much, Stephen and John, and I know we will be back next month again to discuss all of these topics further, because this is way too interesting and way too critical in our timing to let this go and not pursue it. The outstanding feedback our show continues to come in, and we certainly thank all of our viewers, I dare use the term fans, of Your Right to Know. Our show is aired every Tuesday evening at 5 o'clock p.m., Fridays at 7 o'clock a.m., and again on Sunday mornings at 10 o'clock. You can also find our show on YouTube by looking for us at Fitchburg FRCC, no space, on our web page, and also on our Facebook page. All links are available for sharing with others through the social media sites, and we encourage all of our viewers to share this show with others. In addition to FATV, the FRCC can be heard on David Martinez's Daily Pulse Show on WPKZ Radio 1280 AM and 105.3 FM on the first Thursday of every month from 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock in the morning. Our goal is to get the Republican conservative message out. It is incumbent upon you, our listeners, to do your part and share all of our programming. We are in the midst of a big election. On June 25th, we will vote for a new senator. Please support our candidate, our Republican candidate, Gabriel Gomez. To find out more about Mr. Gomez and his campaign, or to even volunteer, please go to his webpage, www.gomez4mass.com. Well, that's it for tonight. We want to thank you for watching and hope you enjoyed Your Right to Know. When sitting down to watch TV, we hope you continue to tune in to FATV and the FRCC. Again, I thank you, my friends Stephen and John, for being with us tonight. We also wish to thank our unsung heroes, Joyce, Kathy, Jake, Roy, and Fred behind the scenes. They are our unsung heroes and making us look good and sound good. We certainly appreciate your efforts and would like you to join us at monthly meetings. We meet at Destare the second Thursday of every month at 7 o'clock. Please join us there.
Happy Memorial Day, everybody.
Thank you, and good night.
America, we stand for freedom. So let us all unite to yearn and strive for our republic that reflects our values, that preserves our rights, and goes forth in power and might, that reflects our values and preserves our rights, and goes forth in power and